is actually 145%, not 125% as they told us yesterday.
It doesn't, and how we got to 145%.
We've seen the tit for tat escalating without the leaders.
A new tariff storm is sweeping across America, not just through markets and industries, but right into everyday lives. From the rising cost of your morning coffee to deteriorating alliances with longtime partners, President Donald Trump's revived protectionist policies are shaking the global order, and it's ordinary Americans who are footing the bill. In April 2025, the Trump administration enacted a sweeping escalation in tariffs. Chinese imports were hit with a staggering 145% tariff, the highest in U.S. history. Just hours later, Beijing retaliated with tariffs of 125% on American exports. Key U.S. goods, soybeans, sorghum, and vehicles were caught in the crossfire, reigniting a trade war that many thought had ended in 2020. This tit-for-tat has disrupted over $650 billion in annual trade between the two superpowers. The justification? A national security and a renewed push to combat fentanyl trafficking, with Trump arguing that high tariffs on Canadian and Chinese goods would help block the deadly opioid. But federal data tells another story. Less than 1% of illicit fentanyl in the U.S. actually comes from Canada, casting serious doubt on the logic of this move. Meanwhile, the domestic consequences are unavoidable. Food prices are surging. Gas is climbing past $5 a gallon in many states. Inflation expectations have jumped to 3.7% for 2025 levels, not seen since the early 1980s. The Federal Reserve has warned that these tariffs could directly lead to higher unemployment, potentially pushing joblessness above 5% by the end of the year. And for working-class Americans and retirees, the pain is personal. According to Yale University's Budget Lab, the average U.S. household will pay an additional $3,800 per year due to the new tariffs, hitting those on fixed incomes. The hardest, even grocery stores are struggling to keep prices stable. Tariffs now target common household imports like bananas, 10% from Costa Rica and Ecuador, shrimp, 32% from Indonesia, 46% from Vietnam, and salmon, 16% from Norway. Coffee from Brazil and Ethiopia faces a 10% tax. While some price hikes haven't hit the shelves yet, grocers warn that once inventories run dry, prices could spike overnight. The stock market hasn't been spared either. In the days following the announcement, the S&P 500 shed over $5.8 trillion in market value, a wipeout not seen since the COVID crash. A Reuters 9 Ipsos poll reveals that 73% of Americans now expect higher prices on nearly all goods, including essentials like fuel and food. But perhaps the most dramatic fallout has been diplomatic. Canada, once the U.S.'s most dependable neighbor and largest trading partner, responded quickly. Foreign Minister Melanie Joly publicly declared, "The relationship between the U.S. and Canada will never be the same." Canada immediately imposed retaliatory tariffs on U.S. agricultural equipment, construction materials, and consumer goods. Prime Minister Mark Carney added, "We will reject all attempts to wear Canada down. This isn't just a trade dispute. It's a matter of sovereignty." The impact has gone beyond trade, it's now social. Canadian and American companies that once shared seamless cross-border supply chains are now dealing with delays, inflated costs, and contract cancellations. What was once a model of economic cooperation is turning into a cold economic war. And the backlash didn't stop at the northern border. In Europe, Germany became a surprising target. After Trump publicly mocked Germany's clean energy strategy, claiming the country had failed at wind power, and was back to coal, Chancellor Angela Merkel fired back. Germany's green economy is the result of decades of investment in sustainability and emissions reduction, she stated. To demand a reversal is not only disrespectful, it is economically illiterate. German exports, including Riesling wine, automotive parts, and even Birkenstock sandals, now face potential U.S. tariffs of up to 40%. According to Reuters, Germany's finance ministry has warned that these sanctions could tip the country into recession. Even America's own business community is beginning to break ranks. Dozens of industry leaders, from tech CEOs to Midwest manufacturers, have urged Congress to act. "This is not strategic competition," one executive wrote in an open letter. "It's economic self-sabotage." Meanwhile, China's response is evolving beyond traditional tariffs. Beijing has signaled its intent to reduce reliance on the U.S. dollar in trade settlements, accelerating efforts to internationalize the digital yuan and conduct more bilateral transactions in alternative currencies. This push toward de-dollarization is part of a broader economic strategy to insulate China from future U.S. sanctions and monetary pressure, further deepening the divide between the world's two largest economies. What's clear is this: Americans are paying more. The world is drifting further apart, and what was sold as a policy of strength is looking more and more like a burden the public can no longer afford. The question now isn't whether Trump's tariff storm will end. Stay tuned, because what happens next may be even hotter than what you've just heard.
Tariffs to pay for tax cuts is getting more traction.
Tariffs are a tax cut for the American people.
Did you know that President Trump's latest tariff plan could add billions to the U.S. Treasury? But at what cost to your wallet? Trump dropped a bombshell. He wants to use that tariff money to slash taxes. Sounds great, right? But what if it means skyrocketing prices, a global trade war, and a policy some are calling a delusional rant? Today, we're diving deep into this controversial plan, unpacking its impact on the U.S. economy, and revealing what people are really saying about it. You won't believe the stakes. Let's get started.
President, what are you planning on using the money that you're gaining from revenue through the tariffs on?
Paying down national debt, reducing taxes, creating good budgets, helping Christie with the border and all of the other things we built.
This moment, captured during a White House press briefing and shared on X, has sparked a firestorm of reactions. On one hand, the idea of reducing taxes sounds appealing to many Americans. On the other hand, critics are raising serious concerns about the feasibility and consequences of this plan. Let's start by setting the stage. First, let's talk about tariffs. For those who might not know, tariffs are taxes imposed on goods imported from other countries. They're typically a percentage of the product's value. For example, a 10% tariff on a $10 product adds a $1 tax, making it $11 for the buyer. President Trump has made tariffs a cornerstone of his economic vision, arguing they protect American jobs and boost domestic manufacturing. But they also raise prices for consumers. More on that later. Since his inauguration in January 2025, Trump has rolled out several tariff policies. On February 1st, he announced a 25% tariff on Canadian and Mexican exports to the U.S., plus an additional 10% on Chinese goods. By March, tariffs on Chinese imports jumped to 20%, and on April 2nd, a 25% duty on cars was set to take effect. Some exemptions were made, like for certain car makers, but the overall trend is clear. Trump is doubling down on tariffs. The timing of this statement is crucial. Just hours before Trump's comment, reports emerged that Canada and the U.S. were nearing a tariff deal. Canada proposed dropping its tariffs if the U.S. reciprocates, with a potential action as early as April 11th, yesterday, as of this video. Trump himself said a deal was very close, but stressed it had to be on terms favorable to the U.S. Trump's plan, using tariffs to cut taxes. Now, let's get to the heart of Trump's statement: using tariff revenues to reduce taxes. According to the Tax Foundation, a 10% universal tariff could raise $2 trillion over the next decade, while a 20% tariff could bring in $3.3 trillion. That's a lot of money. But here's the catch. These estimates don't account for the economic shrinkage that tariffs might cause. Tariffs reduce imports by making foreign goods more expensive, which can hurt industries that rely on those imports. Economists warn that tariffs often lead to higher prices for consumers. A study from the University of Chicago found that most of the economic burden of tariffs falls on the country imposing them, in this case, U.S. consumers. For example, when Trump imposed a 50% tariff on washing machines in 2018, prices jumped by about 12%, costing Americans an extra $1.5 billion a year. So, if tariffs raise prices for everyday goods, how does that square with reducing taxes? Trump's idea seems to be that the revenue from tariffs, potentially billions of dollars, could be used to offset tax cuts for Americans. Supporters like ex-user Jay Bird argue that a tax cut for one is a tax cut for all, and some even hope Trump might eliminate the income tax entirely. But not everyone is on board with Trump's plan. Reactions on X have been a whirlwind of skepticism, frustration, and outright disbelief. One commenter shared a facepalm meme, sarcastically remarking that Trump seems to be winging it with this policy. Another went further, calling the tariff-to-tax cut scheme a delusional rant by a convicted felon pretending to be a fiscal conservative, and argued that tariffs are nothing more than taxes on Americans, not foreign countries. A different reaction questioned whether this is even a real economic policy or just a magic trick, highlighting concerns that tariffs could lead to higher prices for everyone while tax cuts might disproportionately benefit the wealthy. Others raised a critical point. If tariff money is being used for tax cuts, what about paying down our national debt? It's a valid worry, considering the U.S. national debt is at its highest level relative to the economy since World War II, a problem that grew significantly during Trump's first term. According to ProPublica, the national debt rose by nearly $7.8 trillion during Trump's first term, largely due to his 2017 tax cuts, which reduced federal revenue by about $1.9 trillion over 11 years. Tariffs brought in some money, $71 billion in 2019, but that's a drop in the bucket compared to the debt, which now sits at around 130% of GDP. The bigger picture: economic and global implications. Let's zoom out for a moment. Trump's tariff strategy isn't just about domestic policy, it's shaking up global trade. Canada, one of America's closest allies, has pushed back hard. Prime Minister Mark Carney recently called the U.S.-Canada relationship over, citing Trump's tariffs as a breaking point. Canada has imposed 25% counter tariffs on U.S. auto imports, a direct response to Trump's levies on Canadian steel and aluminum. And it's not just Canada. China has raised tariffs on U.S. goods to a staggering 125%, escalating the trade war. The EU, Vietnam, and others are also scrambling to negotiate or retaliate. Economists fear this could lead to a global trade war, with prices rising across the board for everything from clothing to electronics. The Tax Foundation warns that tariffs could offset any economic benefits of tax cuts by causing a net reduction in tax revenues and economic output. They also disproportionately hurt lower and middle-income households who spend a larger share of their income on imported goods. So, while tax cuts might sound great, the reality could be a lot messier. So, where do we go from here? Trump's statement about using tariff revenues to cut taxes has sparked a heated debate about America's economic future. On one side, supporters see it as a bold move to boost domestic industry and give Americans a tax break. On the other, critics warn of higher prices, a ballooning national debt, and strained international relations. As Canada's Premier Doug Ford put it, a tariff on Canada is a tax on Americans. Whether or not a tariff deal is finalized, the ripple effects of this policy will be felt for years to come. Will Trump's plan deliver the economic boost he promises, or will it lead to more financial strain for everyday Americans? Only time will tell.
Donald Trump made one of the dumbest decisions he's ever made as president, and that is saying a whole lot.
You have the Dow, the NASDAQ, and the S&P all down below, as you can see there, 3%.
Wall Street is in chaos. Trillions have vanished overnight. And at the center of the storm, Donald Trump's explosive new tariffs and a chilling question: did someone inside the White House profit from the fallout? As of April 12, 2025, the U.S. is facing a dual crisis: an economic gut punch and a political scandal that could shake the foundations of Trump's comeback presidency. Is this bold economic nationalism or a calculated scheme with winners already lined up behind closed doors? Let's rewind. On April 2nd, Trump declared what he called Liberation Day. In a surprise announcement, the former president, now back in office, unleashed a sweeping tariff regime targeting America's top trading partners. A 10% baseline tariff was slapped on all imports, with punishing increases aimed squarely at China, Vietnam, and Japan. Chinese goods were hit with a staggering 60% tariff hike, bringing the total duty to 145%. Vietnam got a 46% rate, while Japanese imports were taxed at 24%. The move blindsided financial markets. Within 48 hours, the S&P 500 plunged by 10.1%, erasing a jaw-dropping $6.6 trillion in market value. Experts liken the shock to a financial 9/11, abrupt, staggering, and global in its consequences. Trump defended the tariffs as a necessary strike against foreign exploitation. He called it the beginning of a new American century. But economists warned of surging prices, supply chain disruptions, and global retaliation. The American consumer, once again, may be the one left paying the price. But what truly escalated this into a political powder keg was what happened next. On April 9th, just 1 week after triggering global market panic, Trump posted on Truth Social, "By now, you'll be thanking me later." Within hours, his administration announced a 90-day pause on most of the tariffs, except those targeting China. Markets stabilized, stocks surged, and traders who bought the dip saw enormous gains. That's when House Democrats pounced. Led by Senate Banking Committee Chair Sherrod Brown and Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrats launched an investigation into potential insider trading within the Trump administration. Their suspicion: someone may have known in advance about the tariff pause and made a killing off the crash-and-bounce cycle. "The American people deserve to know if Trump's inner circle manipulated markets for personal gain," said Warren in a fiery statement, adding fuel to the fire, watchdog group accountable. On U.S. identified suspicious trading patterns that suggest a possible correlation between government decisions and well-timed trades. They've called on the SEC to investigate. Trump, for his part, has dismissed the uproar as radical left hysteria. He claims the tariff move was part of a long-term strategy to bring manufacturing home and to end what he calls the economic slavery to China. "We have to be tough," Trump told reporters. "If the market can't handle that, it's not my problem." But critics say this isn't economic patriotism. It's reckless gambling with the U.S. economy. And now they want answers. So what's really happening here? There are two competing narratives. Supporters argue Trump is finally standing up to foreign manipulation and protecting American industry. They say short-term pain is worth the long-term independence. "This is economic warfare," said Steve Bannon, "and Trump is the general we need." But critics see something far more sinister: a president playing puppet master with the global economy, creating chaos, then profiting from the rebound. It's a pattern that raises the specter of 2020, when senators like Kelly Loeffler were accused of trading on early COVID intel. The stakes now? Even higher. And the markets aren't done reacting. Economists warn that uncertainty alone could slow growth and trigger inflation, just as the Fed begins relaxing interest rates. Meanwhile, America's allies are bracing for retaliation. China has already hinted at counter tariffs. Japan and Vietnam are holding emergency trade consultations. The ripple effects could touch everything from food prices to tech gadgets. Behind all this lies a deeper question. Is this policy or performance, strategy or spectacle? In just 10 days, Donald Trump managed to crash the stock market, spook global investors, and trigger a major political investigation. Was this a misstep or a Machiavellian move? And most importantly, who knew what and when? If insider trading allegations hold weight, this could be one of the most explosive financial scandals in modern presidential history. But what do you think? Is Trump playing 4D chess, or has he gone too far?
Beijing is hiking its retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods from 84% to 125%.
This is the tariff war
between the world's two biggest economies.
This is no longer just a trade dispute. This is a full-scale economic counterattack. In a thunderous move that's rattled global markets, China has slapped a brutal 125% tariff on U.S. goods. It's a direct shot at President Trump's hardline trade policy, and it may just trigger the most dangerous escalation yet in the U.S.-China power struggle. The trade war between the United States and China has reignited under President Trump's second term, and this time, it's even more aggressive. On April 10, 2025, President Trump announced a sweeping tariff increase on Chinese imports, raising duties to an unprecedented 145%. Calling it a or bold strike for American workers, Trump defended the move as necessary to counter decades of what he described as Chinese theft, manipulation, and economic warfare. Beijing wasted no time. By April 11th, China hit back hard, raising its own tariffs on U.S. goods from 84% to a punishing 125%. The retaliation took effect immediately and targets some of the most politically sensitive sectors of the U.S. economy. In a strongly worded statement, China's Ministry of Commerce said, "The U.S. provocation leaves us no choice. If Washington continues down this path, it will render its own measures economically meaningless." The economic shockwaves were instant and severe. American farmers, many of whom backed Trump in both 2016 and 2024, are now facing catastrophic losses. Soybeans, corn, pork, and dairy exports to China have effectively ground to a halt. What was once a $20 billion market for U.S. agriculture has suddenly turned hostile, and farming communities across the Midwest are bracing for the worst. Meanwhile, U.S. manufacturers have been caught in the crossfire. Construction and mining equipment, auto parts, and industrial machinery, key American exports, have been slapped with massive tariffs that could drive Chinese buyers elsewhere. Companies like Caterpillar and John Deere are now warning investors of lower quarterly earnings ahead. The financial sector isn't safe either. Wall Street reacted sharply. The dollar plunged to a decade low against the Swiss franc. Stock indices dipped as investors scrambled to adjust to the new trade reality. Gold surged while oil markets turned volatile on fears of broader economic fallout. Tech firms, always sensitive to overseas policy shifts, are scrambling to reorient supply chains. China's retaliatory tariff plan included key exemptions. Most notably, semiconductors produced outside the U.S. This means American chip makers that manufacture in Taiwan or South Korea, like NVIDIA, have a clear advantage. Others, like Intel, which rely more on U.S. production, are now vulnerable to steep losses. This is no longer about individual products or trade deficits. This is a battle over who controls the future of the global economy. Trump is betting that aggressive tariffs will force China to capitulate to abandon state subsidies, stop pressuring U.S. firms for technology, and open its markets. But critics say the strategy is flawed. By targeting Beijing so directly, the U.S. risks isolating allies and pushing China into deeper trade alliances with nations like Russia, Brazil, and even the EU. China, on the other hand, is playing a more calculated game. It's striking back where it hurts, politically aiming directly at Trump's voter base while carving out advantages for pro-China multinationals. Beijing's exemptions for certain chip firms show it's trying to divide U.S. industry, and it might be working. The risk now is decoupling. If the world's two largest economies permanently split their supply chains, the cost to global growth could be devastating. Emerging markets, especially in Southeast Asia, Africa, and Latin America, may be forced to choose sides. And with financial markets already rattled, even a small misstep could spiral into a global recession. But Trump doesn't seem interested in backing down. In a fiery rally in Ohio just hours after China's announcement, he declared, "We will not surrender to Beijing. We will win this trade war, and we will win it big." That statement may rally his base, but it's also a sign that the path ahead could be far more dangerous. The U.S.-China trade conflict has entered a new and unpredictable phase. With Trump doubling down and Beijing firing back harder than ever, this isn't just a tariff battle, it's a test of global leadership. Can President Trump's bold strategy force China to fold? Or is Beijing laying the groundwork for a new world order where America no longer calls the shots? Let us know what you think in the comments. Are we witnessing a masterstroke of negotiation or the beginning of an economic unraveling? And don't forget to subscribe for more fearless breakdowns of global power moves, political standoffs, and the economic battles shaping tomorrow's world.